Can I get in? How do we get in here? How do we come around?
Climb over?
Yes. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Can I put this here? Thank you. Okay. Do you have a... Oh, do we have... Is this one? Is it one mic?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. We can share.
We can share.
Hello, everyone. Hi. Oh, sorry.
Hi. Also me.
Thank you so much for being here. This is the first time we've ever done an event like this, and we're stoked. So thank you all for coming. We're going to introduce ourselves because we're going to assume that like 90% of you have no idea who we are, and you just happen to be at this awesome event. So we are National Park After Dark. My name is Danielle.
And my name's Cassie.
Yeah. So we began this podcast about 3 years ago, going on 4. We had no idea that anyone would listen other than our moms. So the fact that you guys all listen is really, really fun. We are from Southern New Hampshire ourselves. Woohoo!
New Hampshire!
And we had no experience with podcasts, and Cassie barely knew what one was when I asked her if she wanted to do one with me. So we were both veterinary technicians for... Oh, okay.
You got some veterinary technicians here, or in the veterinary field.
Or just like dogs, which is also fine. So we were in the veterinary field for a while.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we got another fan.
We were in the veterinary field for a long time, and we were each other's outdoor work friends. So when we weren't working, we were hiking the Whites together. And we love morbid things. And when we were hiking together, we would chat about all the things that went wrong where we were hiking and beyond. And that's kind of how the podcast began. Anything to add?
My turn to introduce us. Yes, everything Danielle said. So basically for tonight, what we have prepared for all of you is that we thought it would be really fun to, while our podcast normally focuses mostly around national parks, we wanted to take it to the White Mountains National Forest.
Woo!
We might as well tell you some stories in the location that you are at tonight. And what a better place to do it than around a campfire. So this is ghost stories around a campfire, lore, legend here. Just as a warning for you all, there are some morbid stories in here, so it's dark history that happened. So if you're into true crime and dark things, that is what we're about to get into.
That's what we're about. Woohoo!
And for the podcast, if you haven't listened to the podcast before, so how we format our stories is we love to tell a little bit about the locations that we're in, and then we like to go into the stories. And tonight, because we are in the White Mountains National Forest, we'd like to go into a little bit just about this area. If you're not familiar, if you're new up here, if you're here all the time, but you want to learn some new things about it, we have put together 3 different locations, or I guess technically 4 different locations around New Hampshire that have names that you might not know why they are named that, but there are really dark stories behind the names that are there today. And they're all places that maybe you've been before.
Oh, here. We haven't memorized this, Well,
this is mostly for, there's a lot of, because our podcasts are very history-based, we have a lot of dates that are hard to remember. So we wrote down some notes so we would remember the dates that things happened for. But for the White Mountains National Forest, a fun fact about here is that the White Mountains are actually only one of 2 national forests in all of New England. There is here, and then there is also the Green Mountains National Forest in Vermont. Yeah, I heard of it. I live in Vermont. I live right in the National Forest, so it's cool to get to experience both of them. But what's really cool about the White Mountains, this is, like Danielle said, this has been home for us. I went to Plymouth State University. Got some PSU grads in here. I know you all party. I've been there. I've seen what happens at PSU. But we spent our time growing up here, and what is especially really cool about the White Mountains is that it is also one of the most visited national forests there is. So here, there are about 6 million people that come up to visit, which is national park status. I mean, that's what you're getting in a lot of national parks, and we get it here right in New Hampshire, which is really cool. And here, there is so much recreation. I mean, we have hiking, biking, climbing, of course. Can't forget the climbing. And there is just so much to do here. Of course, we have the 4,000 footers. If you're not familiar with that, there's the 48 4,000 footers, which we're going to be taking you to for some of our stories today. And the fun thing about this is because it's in such a good driving distance from places, that's why we have so much that happens here. So before we get into if I'm missing any of our little stories, I guess one thing I wanted to ask is how do you all,
Okay, hold on. You know the big highway?
I didn't want to say the name.
Yeah, I know. That New Hampshire is known for?
How do you say it?
Say it out loud really
Say it out
well.
loud. I heard it.
Okay.
Kangamangas.
We're just going to put this out here right now. We never, the kank, yeah, let's just say that. So we never realized how upset people get with mispronunciation of things until we put our voices on the internet. And we have always grown up saying the Kankamangas. There is no N in there, like we're adding in something. So it's the Kankamagus. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So if we say the Kankamangas, we're not trying to be disrespectful by mispronouncing it, but that's literally, it's not pronounced that way, according to Google. But we live here, so, and we grew up saying the Kankamangas. So we just wanted to get everyone's opinion before we upset anyone.
I guess also something to note is actually it's not pronounced the Kangamangas because the Kangamangas is named after a person who we will also get into. So
Kankamagus.
Kankamagus.
I don't know, look at her notes.
We wrote out the pronunciation because we knew that we were going to do this. But the first place that we're going to go within the White Mountains National Forest is we're going to go to Mount Willie.
Yes. Oh, yes, here we go. Oh, that's me. Yep. All right. You might have to be my light, though.
Here you go.
Thank you. Okay, so first we're, like Cassie said, we're going to the Willie House, which is in the Crawford Notch area. And I feel like for the most of this, we're preaching to the choir because a lot of you guys are very familiar with this area, but in case you're not, the Crawford Notch area is a major pass that runs through the heart of the White Mountain National Forest, and it was named after the Crawford family, who gained a lot of notoriety here for being one of the first, if not the first, non-Indigenous family to settle in this area. One of the first buildings that was constructed in the Notch was known as the Notch House, and it was a 1.5-story building that served as a hotspot, a tavern for people traveling through. A lot of explorers and different scientists coming up to explore the area would stop here, and over the years it was operated by a lot of different innkeepers until the 1800s, when in the fall of 1825 the Notch House was purchased by the Willie family. So the family was Samuel Willie Jr. and his wife Polly, who originally came from Concord, New Hampshire, and they had 5 kids, and they ranged from 2 to 12 years old, and their names were Elbridge, Martha, Jeremiah, Eliza, and Sally. So the family arrived, they bought the house, and it was in a lot of disrepair because it was actually vacant for a few months. So they put in a lot of time renovating it. They hired 2 men to help them renovate the house and the property. They built a farm there, a little wheat farm. They built a nice barn, and they made the tavern in working order again, and they opened it back up to the public. So when it opened, it was once again a really hot travel spot for people coming through. The Willie House itself was positioned in a peculiar spot. So it was at the base of the steep slopes from the surrounding 4,000 footers, and it was in a really narrow gorge strip of area. And the Saco River was also nearby on the property. It was actually in front of the house across the street. So it sounds nice, lovely. It probably sounded nice trickling by, but it was in a precarious spot. The house was positioned to the river. And it was potentially dangerous in an emergency situation, and they knew that, but they found out pretty quick just how bad it was going to get. So the area was susceptible to landslides, and the family saw it firsthand their first summer there when there was a slide that came down the notch and it covered about a mile of area around their house with debris. And the debris came within 200 feet of their house, so their house was spared, but it shook up the family a lot. And so much so, Samuel was really worried that something like that was going to happen again, and it was kind of too close for comfort, the slide, so he decided to make kind of like a little shelter, like I envisioned like a tornado shelter type of thing close to the house so that his family had somewhere safe to go in case anything like that ever happened again. And he was scared, but he wasn't scared enough to move his house. He actually talked to his brother about it because this slide made no local papers and really got the community concerned. And he actually told his brother, quote, "Such an event, we know, has not happened here for a very long time past, and another of its kind is not likely to occur for an equally long time to come. Taking things past in this view, I am not afraid." So he said he wasn't afraid, but again, he made that shelter. He made the shelter, so he was probably concerned enough to make some precautions. And unfortunately, those are kind of like his famous last words, "I'm not afraid." In the worst case scenario that he was preparing for came only just 2 months later after that original slide. In the months following the first slide event, the state was actually experiencing a really severe drought, and it dried the soil to a deeper depth than usual. And abruptly, the drought ended on one night, August 28th, when one of the most severe storms in New Hampshire state history slammed into the Crawford Notch area. The skies opened and torrential rain flooded the area, destroyed all the bridges in the notch, and rose the Saco River, that's right next to their house, 20 feet in less than a day. The dry earth made the ground extra susceptible to the landslides, which is exactly what happened, and destruction slid down the notch directly towards the Willies' home. The landslide avalanche was absolutely devastating. It obliterated nearly everything in its wake, and the sound of the landslide was documented up to 30 miles away. So this was a huge natural disaster. And so the storm goes on for a few days, the landslide occurs, days pass, and no one has heard from the Willie family. So after several days, friends and relatives from nearby went to investigate. They had to navigate nearly 6 miles of debris and rubble leading straight to the home, and to their amazement, the enormous landslide that's caused all this destruction for miles and miles around, that had barreled down the pass, demolished everything in its path except for the Willie home. It was the only structure standing. So they're stoked. They hear a dog barking in the house. They go up thinking that the family is maybe just trapped in there. Maybe someone's injured and they just haven't been able to get out as a family. But they approach the house and they open the door and there's a dog waiting for them, but everything else is completely disheveled. The beds were unmade. There was things all over the kitchen. There was a Bible that was out on the table and a candle that had clearly burned down to the base. All their belongings were strewn about. It was clear that the family left in a hurry. As a search party was sent out in hopes of finding the family in the shelter that Samuel created, maybe they thought that the shelter entrance was covered with all the debris. But unfortunately, it was apparent that the entire family had perished. The bodies of Polly and David Allen, which was one of the hired men they helped to spruce up the home, were found badly mangled in the debris just directly below the home. The bodies of Samuel and his 3-year-old daughter Sally were found next. And 5 days later, the remains of Eliza Willie and David Nicholson, the other hired man, were located far from the house on the opposite side of the Saco River. Jeremiah, Martha, and Elbridge were never located. The devastation that the landslide created in the story of the Willie family and their home spread throughout the nation. This was huge news, and it attracted the attention of a lot of people, including notable figures. There was Thomas Cole, that was known at the time for his dramatic landscape paintings. He came to the area and documented the landslide and the destruction. Ministers used the disaster as a basis for sermons, and poets were inspired to write long poems about the incident. And it even attracted Nathaniel Hawthorne, if anybody is familiar with him. He's from Salem, Massachusetts, and he wrote The Scarlet Letter in the House of the Seven Gables. He also penned a work titled The Ambitious Guest, which was inspired by the Willie family in this disaster. Even Edward Melcher, who was the last survivor of the search and recovery party sent out for the Willie family, wrote a book about his experience searching for their bodies, and he published that in the 1880s. So the Willie Inn and the tavern remained open, obviously functioning under some different ownership. And thanks largely in part to the widespread publicity surrounding the disaster, the loss of life, and the survival of the structure, people absolutely flocked to the White Mountains. Up until this era in history, it's important to note that not many people traveled for pleasure. The first travelers to the White Mountains, like I mentioned before, were either on business, they were explorers, or they were scientists. Or if there were people coming up here for recreation, they were extremely wealthy. So tourism was a far cry from what it is today, and large swaths of the state were not easily accessed. And the roads that were here were really difficult to manage, and it was hard to get much of anywhere. But with the arrival of the railroad in the 1850s, the White Mountains were open to a larger amount of people, and the New Hampshire tourist was born. And as a response to this influx of visitors, hotels began popping up throughout the mountains, including one built directly adjacent to the Willie House. The property was purchased by a guy named Horace Fabian, and he had a lot of properties in the area. Seeing the opportunity, he jumped on it. And he built, purchased, and managed a grand hotel that he built, like I said, directly attached to the Willie home. And it was a 50-room brand new hotel, and it drew in tourists far and wide. And he named it the Willie Hotel. And the nation knew the Willies, and they knew the tragedy and how the family perished there. So this site became kind of like an OG dark tourism location. And people came here specifically to be directly at the location of this dark tragedy. Both of these buildings, the Willie House and the hotel that was built next to it, were destroyed in a fire in 1899. And although the Willie House is no longer standing, the land it stood on is commemorated within Crawford Notch State Park. The Willie name lives on in features surrounding this site, including Willie Pond, Mount Willie, which is a 4,000-footer, and of course, the Willie House historic site that functions as an interpretive center now at the site of the disaster within Crawford Notch State Park.
Yes, and if you go there, to add a little bright side there, because that's horrible. If you go to the center, they serve you hot soup after a long day of hiking and ice cream. And they have a gift shop that is there. But to go back into more of how we said at the beginning, where these places have some legend and lore behind them, is such a tragedy. We probably have heard, if you're interested in dark histories, a lot of times they have ghost stories that surround them afterwards. So I always say Mount Wiley. Mount Willie is known as one of the most haunted trails within the White Mountains National Forest, and it is directly because of this tragedy. And actually, when you look back in history, there were strange happenings that started directly after this happened. So his brother, Samuel's brother, came forward after the tragedy and told people that he had a visitation from his brother in one of his dreams. And in that visitation, he explained exactly what happened in those final moments before his family perished. And this was especially important because his family at the time had been really kind of arguing and debating on how this happened. Why were they not in their home that wasn't destroyed? Why were they outside in the middle of this landslide? And people were, especially their family, were really questioning how this could happen. So one night when he was sleeping, he had a dream that his brother came in a visitation and told him that the reason that they were outside the house and not in the house was because they were really worried with the rain that the Saco River, they were watching it rise and rise and rise to their house. And then they got very worried that their house was going to be underwater. So in attempts to escape a potential flood, they left their house and went to higher ground. And that's when the landslide hit. Now, when they heard that, when he got that dream, he came forward and he said, this was so realistic that I know for certain that this was my brother who came to me as a visitation and told me this. And they also decided, after all the deliberation that they had done before of what had happened, that that was actually the only plausible explanation of why they would have been where they were. And now, as for the trail, there have been hikers who report hearing strange noises when they're out on this trail by themselves, especially for solo hikers, but all hikers, they've heard strange moans, cries, and shrieking coming from who knows what, who knows where. And whenever it's been investigated to be like, is there someone out here? Does someone need help? There's never been someone who is there. Also, in this, if you're a solo hiker, there have been solo hikers who have been out on the trail who had seen an apparition that will pop up of a hiker walking towards them, and then in a blink of an eye, they'll suddenly disappear. I don't love that, personally. And I would be freaking out. I'd be looking behind every tree. I'd be like, that guy just dipped over there, and now I'm in trouble. But it's not. It's a ghost, but not all the time. So if that does happen, please be aware that maybe it's not a ghost and something here is going on. There's also been an instance where a hiker reported that they were out and they were hiking alone, another solo hiker, and she was doing this trail and she was walking around, and suddenly she got picked up by some force that she couldn't see or see it at all, and it picked her up and turned her around on the trail. And she took that as a sign to not continue on the trail. She's like, I don't know what just happened. I don't know, this wind, weirdly, have you guys seen those microbursts where you get like lifted, it lifts things up? I imagine it wasn't like as serious as a microburst, but she was picked up, turned around, and she took it as a sign like something doesn't want me to go this way, turned around and went home. So those are a couple of those stories that happen. So if you are up here, it's in Crawford Notch, it's not too far from here. If you are doing Mount Willie while you're up here at any point, just keep an eye out because maybe you will see some ghosts while you're up here.
Woo!
And now Danielle has another place that also has a ghostly history attached to it.
All right, so we're gonna stick in the Notch area and we're going to another trail. So the name behind this trail has kind of a sad lover's story. We're going back a little bit further into the 1700s, into 1778, and there was a young woman named Nancy Barton, and she was just 16 years old. And as the story goes, she was a servant for Colonel Joseph Whipple in Jefferson, New Hampshire, when she first fell in love with a young man named Jim Swindle, who worked at, I just realized, Swindle, do you remember that Netflix show? Like the Swindler? Tinder Swindler? Yeah, this guy's
Related.
a swindler too. So he worked as a farmhand for Colonel Whipple. And as time passed, Nancy fell for Jim and hard. She fell head over heels for him, and she was telling everyone that she could find, neighbors, friends, other employees, about this newfound love and how they felt for each other and how they wanted the same things out of life. Just young love, you know, we've all been 16, right? And their plans were to get married and start a life together and move to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And to prepare for this, she, for some reason, entrusted Jim with all of the wages that she accumulated while working for Colonel Whipple, which was a sum that amounted to almost her entire life savings.
No.
And she said, I trust you. You can have it all. And there are 3 different versions to what happens next. So the truth is lost to history. But during the time in which Nancy was busy planning for their future, either Colonel Whipple, their boss, and Jim conspired together. And Colonel Whipple at the time was a strong supporter of the colonies during the Revolutionary War. And it's rumored that he convinced Jim to use all of Nancy's money to give to the army and join the colonist army. The second version is that Colonel Whipple was disapproving of this match between Nancy and Jim, and he basically sent Jim away because he didn't want them together. And then the third and final version of the story is that Jim simply just took all of Nancy's money and ran away on his own, which I think is probably the most plausible. But regardless of what Jim had in mind and what he did leave. And Nancy was completely devastated, but she was not going to let him go that easily. She had heard that he was going to Portsmouth on his own. And she's like, hey, we're supposed to do that together. So I'm going to follow you. And Portsmouth is about 130 miles away from where they were. So she set out to find him on foot. And according to her neighbors, she was adamant that she was just going to confront Jim and everything was going to be fine. They'd have a conversation, smooth things over, and they would either go back to Jefferson together or continue their plan in Portsmouth together. And it's a mystery as to what her exact thought process was, but she hastily just threw together a small bag, a handful of clothes. She had no food, no other provisions, and she literally just started walking. And she made it about 20 miles before she had to stop to rest. But back in Jefferson, her neighbors rallied together with a small group of concerned friends and other townspeople and formed a search party for her that very same night and ventured out to try and catch up with her. Nancy, meanwhile, was on the move, and she was deep within Crawford Notch at this point. She was cold, she was fatigued, it was getting dark, she was probably hungry and weak, and she was starting to lose her balance and her steam, and she stumbled into a brook and fell in. She soaked her dress with some frigid water, made it out of the brook, but she was really, really cold and tired. It had started to snow, so she's kind of going through some snow drifts here, and she saw a little pile of rocks next to the brook and decided to take a rest. So she sat down, and nearby, the search party was close to her. They saw her tracks in the snow and they were gaining on her, and they decided to hightail it to her, and they come across her, and she's still sitting on the rocks. She has a wooden walking stick and she's leaning on it. It looks like she's literally just leaning her head over and taking a break. But when they approached her, she was frozen solid and she had passed away. It wasn't long until the locals and beyond heard the news of what happened to Nancy, and when word reached Jim what happened to his girl, he was consumed with remorse and a deep sense of guilt. And he experienced a lot of struggles after with his mental health, and he actually passed away not too long after in a nearby hospital, even though we don't know the exact cause of death. And soon after her passing, locals began referring to a local mountain as Mount Nancy. And over time, the locals' designation for this peak gained official recognition, and it actually won approval from the U.S. Board of Geographic Names in 1890 and has officially been Mount Nancy ever since. Nancy was buried next to the brook where her body was found, and there was a sign that was posted there for many years up until the 1950s that read, Nancy of Jefferson, New Hampshire, perished here in 1778 following the wild path of the Notch for nearly 30 miles in a vain attempt to overtake her faithless lover. She has since been moved, her body, and her burial site is now located on a 100-acre property of a romantic, classic New England stay, bed and breakfast, named the Notchland Inn. And nearby, the Nancy Brook Trail can be hiked to access Mount Nancy among the Nancy Cascade Range, Nancy Pond Trail, and Nancy Cascades Lower Falls are all named in honor of Nancy Barton. And the entire area where all of those locations are within the National Forest. That this area within the national, it's like a Russian doll, like the little Russian dolls. There's like a lot of things here, a lot of layers. But the area within the national forest was designated by the National Park Service as a national natural landmark in 1987. So Nancy's story is embedded deep in this area, and anything that's named Nancy Brooke, Nancy whatever, it's named after Nancy Barton and her death.
And of course, there's a haunting. Of course, so as if you're very into ghost stories, you know that if you bury someone near a building, that it is likely to be haunted. So not only is Mount Nancy rumored to be very haunted, but also the Notchland Inn. And that is where she is. She's very, very close by there. So it is rumored that Nancy is still looking for Jim Swindle, and when you're out on the trails, you might hear cries, shrieking, or a woman yelling, and it is believed that Nancy is out on the trails because, again, like the glass trail, every time that this is looked into, that if there is someone out there that needs help, there's never anybody, and it's always a woman out on this trail. Now, for the Notchland Inn, Nancy is actually said to be a friendly ghost, but she has been known to freak out a few people who stay there. She's well-meaning, but she just, people don't love ghosts in their bedrooms when they're staying at an inn. So she is known to put mysterious writings on mirrors in the bathroom while you stay with her. And she is also known to move things and also add objects to the room that you're staying in. And she specifically loves couples. So if you're going to the Notchland Inn this weekend and you are with your significant other, keep an eye out, especially if you want to take a nap, because she likes to strike when you're napping.
Strike.
She does. She likes napping. So couples have reported, in one instance, this couple reported that they came to the hotel, they were tired, they laid down to take a nap. And they woke up to fog on their mirror in their bathroom and the word Abigail written on the mirror.
We don't know.
We don't know who Abigail is. And if I was in that room, I'd be like, who the is Abigail? I'd be looking at my man being like, excuse me, this ghost is snitching on you right now and I need to know who Abigail is. And according to them, when they told this story, they hadn't even used the bathroom. They hadn't showered, hadn't done anything. So they were very confused on why this ghost was writing Abigail. In another instance, when a couple stayed in the hotel, the husband went back to the room to take a nap. He was tired, and the wife went off to do something else. And he woke up a little while later, a couple of hours, we'll say. He woke up, and in the bathroom, written on the mirror, was in lipstick, was happy anniversary. And then on his bedside table was a bouquet of flowers. Very sweet, but a couple blinks later, it disappeared. He asked his wife about it, and also, I believe it was not, sorry, I'm flashing the light in your face. I believe it was not their anniversary, so he asked his wife about it. He's like, what's this? And she's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So Nancy is known to hang out at the Notchland Inn, and if you are planning to stay there, beware. She means well. We're pretty sure she means well. But maybe don't go there if you're cheating on someone because she's going to write their name on the mirror. And, of course, we have another location, and this is the famous Kankamagus.
There is no end.
There's no end, except if you live here.
Yeah. I'm going to try and pronounce his name correctly because it is after an Indigenous person who this story is about. But this is one of the most popular attractions in the Whites, the the Kankamagus Highway. So nearly 800,000 people experience this road, also referred to as the Kank, which is about 34 and a half miles. It's a winding drive along New Hampshire's Route 112. And the road is the most popular probably this time of year because we got the peepers here. People leaf peeping, coming here for the foliage. And it's so beautiful. There's a lot of stretch of this road that doesn't have any businesses or homes or restaurants or gas stations or anything like that. So you can really experience the best of New Hampshire. And while this road is known for its beauty, the way that it was given its name has a little bit of an ugly story. So Kankamagus as a person was one of the most notable and also the last chief of the Pennacook Nation. And known as the Fearless One, he was the grandson of another really well-known leader who also has his name remembered throughout New Hampshire, and his name was Passaconaway. Passaconaway was also known as the Child of the Bear, and he was really well remembered for uniting 17 tribes within central New England in the 1600s. And this unification formed what was later known as the Pennacook Confederacy, which Passaconaway led until his death. So Kankamagus was later named chief of the Pennacook in 1685, and he tried really hard to follow his grandfather's footsteps of peace. But he encountered some issues when the European settlers brought war, violence, and false promises to the area. Enter our next major player here. His name is Richard Waldron, and he lived in Dover, New Hampshire. He was a prominent government official at the time, and his family controlled much of the local New England trade. He was a pretty influential member of colonial New Hampshire. He was a big deal at the time, but he was also known for his trickery and his deceit, especially regarding his relations with the indigenous tribes of the area. Under the false guise of helping refugee members of the Abenaki tribe, offering them housing and meals after the Massachusetts Bay Colony militia waged war against the Abenaki peoples, Waldron, he tricked them and he took them prisoner. He executed a lot of them and also sold a lot of the Abenaki people into slavery. So years after that incident, the memory of that incident did not go away, especially amongst the Abenaki people and the other indigenous tribes of the area. And at this point, which was several years later, it was common for the Pennacook women to be allowed into the homes of troops when they requested shelter and safeguarding. And this prompted a secret plan. Some of the settlers were pretty nervous about letting the indigenous women into their homes, and they raised their concern about that to Waldron, but he dismissed their concern because they were literally just girls, like, what are they gonna do? I'm just a girl. So they basically, Waldron basically said, there's nothing to worry about. They're harmless women, which is another famous last words here. So on the night of June 27, 1689, the Abenaki women staying in the garrison homes unlocked the front doors, and lying in wait in the woods were a bunch of Abenaki warriors led by Kankamagus. And they attacked. And by the time the attack was over, almost half of the colonists were gone. They killed almost everybody. They killed and captured dozens of the colonists. However, the icing on the cake was what happened to Waldron, because he was selected for special treatment for what he did to the Abenaki people. He was captured and strapped to his dining table, and every single Abenaki warrior came to him and sliced him and mutilated him slowly until he died. Every time somebody would take a piece out of him, they would say, "I cross out my account." After Waldron was dead, they lit his house on fire and burned it to the ground. And this incident is remembered today as the Raid on Dover, or the Cocheco Massacre. And if you're ever in Dover, downtown, which I moved there recently, there is a memorial plaque right in the middle of downtown. So take a look for that if you're ever there. And it remembers this incident. So the well-planned and executed attack and plan showcased Kankamagus's skill as a leader and a warrior. And after the attack on Dover, several other attacks ensued. It was kind of a back and forth, ambushes and attacks between the colonists and the indigenous peoples for quite a number of years, and led to a lot of other death and violence. And details of what ultimately happened to Kankamagus is a little foggy, especially in his later life. But everyone believes that he took what remained of the Pennacook Confederacy to what is now the Canadian border region of New Hampshire and lived out the rest of his life there. So back to the highway. The Kank was completed and opened to through traffic in the late 1950s, and it's now designated as one of 3 national scenic byways in the state of New Hampshire. And to be considered for this designation, the byway must meet at least one of 6 intrinsic qualities. So it either has to have high value archaeologically, culturally, historically, naturally, recreationally, or scenically. And the Kank meets all of the above. And when it was officially named in 1957, some New Hampshire legislators were objecting to them naming it after this leader. And they basically said he had a really awful part in history, and he slaughtered a lot of colonists and obviously mutilated and slowly killed Major Waldron. He should not be commemorated in this way, and we shouldn't remember him this way. But there were a few people, including some Hanover representatives, that said, hey, he was a leader, he was a faithful man, and he was a peaceful leader until we provoked him to violence, and he deserves to be remembered. So that is why the Kank is named the Kankamagus Highway, after the Federalist Pennacook leader. And he was forced to violence, I think. Let's just all agree.
And for my haunting stories that I have, Waldron and Kankamagus are not known to haunt any of these areas, but I did want to give you all a place, if you are planning to drive it, I wanted to give you a haunted place to visit along the highway. So this is a historic building that stands there today that you can visit. It's called the Russell Colbath House. And this house goes back to the 1800s. So long after Kankamagus's life, in 1831, the Russell family arrived to this area and they built a house on the property with a chimney. Just looks like a regular house. And when the parents started aging, they passed down the property to their daughter, Ruth, and her husband, Thomas Colbath. And then they inherited the property, and it actually became the first post office in the Passaconaway area, and Ruth was the village's first postmistress, where she served until 1901. Now, on one fall afternoon, similar to a day like today, Ruth's husband, Thomas, came up to her and said, hey, I'm going to run out of the house and I'm going to go run some errands. I'll be back in a little while. She said, okay, see you later. Love you. I'll see you soon. He says, okay, bye. And he leaves. And hours go by and she doesn't see him. He doesn't come home and she gets really worried. So she lights an oil lamp and she puts it in the window with hopes that that will help him find his way back to the house. But that night he doesn't show up. And the next day she waits and waits, hoping that he's going to be there. Doesn't show up. The next day, the same thing. And she calls her friends, not calls because this is the 1800s, but she finds her friends and family, and she says, I don't know what happened to him. Let's find him. So they send out this huge search party to find where he could have gone off to. And still, no sign of him anywhere. So every single night, she waited for him. She lit an oil lamp in the window every night for 39 years, waiting for him to one day come home. Then in 1930, at the age of 80, Ruth died, and she was buried next to the house. And they say maybe to be close to him in case he ever showed up. Well, he did show up. 3 years after she died, he was 83 years old. Thomas arrived back on the doorstep, and people had questions like, hey, where you been? What's going on here?
And he didn't really have an answer. He seemed very aloof for his reasoning of why he would have left. He just said, you know, we didn't get in a fight. This wasn't her fault at all. This was entirely my doing. He goes, and actually, I just went down the road a little bit. I was still in the area for the first year. People are like, what are you talking about? What do you mean you're in the area for a year? And he's like, I don't know. I don't know why. I just did it. And then after that year he went out west to work on the railroads. And he had lived and worked there ever since. And when he returned to the house, he didn't know that Ruth had died, which I'm sure he knew was a possibility because he's 83 years old now. And he also didn't know that after she died, the house was sold. So he showed up. I don't know what his plan was if she had been there. Like, hey, sorry, I got lost. I'm home now. But of course, she would have still had a lantern in the window waiting for him. And after that, after he found out she died, that the house wasn't his, he had no rights over it, there was nothing for him here. He's said to have just walked off, and no one ever saw him again. Now, today, that house that they lived in together is a registered historic site, and it is a house that you can visit when you're on the highway, and you can go see it yourself. They give tours. She's buried there, and it is said that the house is haunted, not by Mr. Colbath, he's gone, we don't know where he went, but by her. It is said that at night, travelers who enter the area are known to see a little lantern in the window lit up and flickering at night. And it is thought that she was still waiting for him, maybe never saw that he came back, but now the house is haunted and you can visit it yourself. So those are all of our stories that we had for tonight a little bit. We just wanted to introduce a couple of these areas with the names. We've always found that it's really cool to know the histories behind the places that you're at. So if you're visiting these places, if you didn't know these stories before, next time you're there, hopefully you can look at them a little bit differently. And in the meantime, we hope that while you're all out traveling, you enjoy the view.
But watch your back.
Thank you. And we just wanted to say thank you to all of you for coming out tonight to hang out with us, to sit around the campfire. This is a dream come true for us just to have this with you guys. I know we met a lot of you today who came up. We have a little merch table over there if any of you are interested. We have some sweatshirts and beanies. But a lot of you came up and said hi, and it means a lot to us. It's really cool to see the faces behind the listeners who are hanging out and listening to the podcast. And it's fun to meet all these new people who have never heard of the podcast before. We hope that you enjoyed the stories tonight, and we hope that you enjoy your weekend. And we want to say a big thank you to Rocktoberfest and Dave and Liam for contacting us and getting us out here. This has been so fun, and this is an amazing event. This is an amazing community. It is so cool to see so many like-minded and friendly people come together for a sport that they love and to be outdoors and just have a great time. So thank you for having us. Thank you for being so kind to us. And we hope that you enjoy your weekend.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you. You could probably turn it off.
And I can probably walk away now.
Yeah.
But if you guys want to still hang out with us, we're going to go hang out at our merch table if you guys want anything, or if you just want to come say hi. I have a bucket of candy over there that I need to get rid of. So if you just want a piece of candy, it's over there.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm like tangled in it.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. We turned it off.
Thank you all. Tomorrow morning.